Okay, we're back to have a look at another Geekvape mod. This new guy is the Obelisk 200. Now, dual cell, have a look at that, all murdered out black. Now, I reckon that's cool. That's my style for sure. It's got that lovely kind of satin, sort of more matte, I guess, matte finished black on it. 200 watts, dual 18650. Do have the L200 there as a comparison. They're advertising this guy as the most compact dual 18650 mod at the moment, and I reckon they're probably pretty close. Like, the new L200 is pretty small really for what it is, and the Obelisk 200 is definitely smaller than that. What else have I got? I can give you a comparison. Hold on. Yeah, actually, I don't know if I would call it that small compared to other mods. There's it next to the ancient old Smoke Alien. Smoke. Yeah, pretty similar, really. Look at what this thing's been through. Poor old Alien. Still works. There's a Vaporesso Revenger from way back in the day as well. These are all old mods that I've got just hanging around the cupboard. Yeah, I'd have to say probably the Revenger's actually a little bit smaller, a little bit taller. Anyway, compared to the L200, definitely a bit smaller, shorter. Thickness about the same. Okay, so what we're going to do is we will pull this apart, have a look what's inside, mainly have a look at the board, and also just see if we can make some observations about the build quality. Look at the wiring, look at how the board's mounted, points of liquid ingress, dust ingress, that sort of thing, and how well the 510 is made, all that sort of stuff. We'll just take it apart and we'll just make some observations about how good it is inside. It's not advertised to be a super tough mod. That's the job of the Aegis L200 or Legend 2. Even though, my opinion, the L200 isn't as tough as the original. Anyway, there's a video on that. But anyway, I'm thinking these two might have a pretty similar board. So if I just tap the buttons on them, the Obelisk is a lot brighter, that's for sure. And it is a slightly different looking screen. So graphically, it's slightly different, but pretty close. And companies do have a habit of, they'll release a series of mods or a group of mods around about the same time, and they'll reuse the board. So they'll do one board design and then they'll just put it in a different physical design. So say, in this case, you've got one mod that's trying to be waterproof and dustproof and shockproof, all that sort of stuff, and then this one's kind of more stylish and sleek. But they're both dual cell 18650, so there's no real reason why you'd need a different board. And if they've gone and made a new board, a new generation of circuit board for this guy, might as well stick it in a different device. But I'm hoping it is actually the same board, because then I won't have to do a full test. I've already done a full test on the L200. I'll put a link in the description to the Reddit post, and it goes through all the charging, power output, converter performance, voltage converter performance, battery meter, all sorts of stuff, efficiency, and just a full electrical test. So go check that if you're interested in all the nerdy stuff. So before we start pulling it apart, I'll just say a few quick things on my personal usage. Yeah, I really like it personally. I think it's sleek, good looking mod. That's my style. Just stealthy and not silly colors and overly designed or any of that. Just nice lines. Fits in your hand really well because you've got that curve in the back. One thing I don't like though is this battery door. So it's actually magnetic, but it's like these ridges aren't sharp enough for you to get any purchase on. So see, I can actually press fairly hard. Oh, there, I got it. And it's quite hard to take the cap off, the battery door off. Then the other thing I don't like is when any part of a mod is removable and that comes off entirely, like it's not attached on a hinge or some other kind of system. I don't like that because I'm so clumsy. I drop stuff, and it'd be just my luck. I'd be changing batteries somewhere, and I'd try to pop this open and it'd go ping, and it'd just fall like down a gap somewhere in a deck, or like just disappear and never be seen again, and then you're screwed because you can't use it. But no, it's a bit weird. It's just weird, that battery door design. because you kind of have to fiddle with it a bit to get in the right spot. And it's a little bit tricky because I'm doing this on camera, but press that down. But yeah, there's no grip. There's not much grip there. You kind of, if you push from the back, it's a bit easier. But these little ridges just do nothing. I know if you're familiar with this kind of metal coating, this sort of finish, it is quite slippery. So that's the other thing, is just be a little bit careful if you got one of these. When you take it out of your pocket, it might kind of slip out of your hand relatively easily. Although these side plastic pieces are quite grippy. On the subject of these side pieces, they don't do anything. They're just there for aesthetics. But they're plastic, so they're going to get fairly scratched, I think. Soft sort of plastic. So that's a bit of a weird kind of design choice there. I mean, it does look cool, but anyway, that's about all there is to it. As far as usage goes, it just looks and behaves exactly the same as the Legend and almost any other dual cell 18650. Push the button and it puts out power and does things and fires your atomizer. One really good thing about this L200, and why I hope this has got the same board, is that this guy has a voltage converter that can put out a full 12 volts output, which I think is awesome, because if you're trying to run a higher ohm build and you want to get decent power, you're going to need decent voltage, and this has got heaps. 12 volts is as much as you're ever going to need. So I hope this has got the same board. But anyway, let's get in and take it apart. Screws on top here are T5. Alrighties, it is good to see that these screws holding the top plate down, and the top plate is also the 510 negative threads, those screws go into metal of the case, which is good, because the L200, it doesn't. It actually goes down into plastic, because all the internals, kind of the middle frame part of the body, is plastic on this guy. So these screws they're going into plastic. Much easier to pull this out if you drop your mod and it lands on the tank and it gets a good whack on the 510. And I have already seen a video. I've already seen a guy who's pulled this whole top plate out of his mod. I only had the thing like a day. Dropped it onto the tank, pulled the whole 510 plate out of the mod. That's obviously no good. So first thing we're seeing there is that these screws go directly into metal, which is great. And interestingly, these 510 threads, the atomizer 510 negative, is case grounded. So what that means is there's no negative wire connection from, directly on the 510 to the board. They're actually using grounding through the plate itself. So this plate is conductive, and it carries all the atomizer current back through the negative, which also means that these surfaces, there, and through the screws, need to be clean and conductive. If you've got a tank that leaks a lot over the plate, and actually a lot of tanks, most tanks they'll leave a bit of condensation around the airflow, and that's not leaking. It's just just vapor coming out around the airflow, and it does sort of condense around on the top plate. So it is fairly common, fairly normal. You take a tank off and it's kind of wet underneath. That's something to think about, because this all has to be electrically conductive and conduct well. So if there's liquid getting down into these joints and corroding them, that's not very good. There's no sealing either. There's no sealing on that top plate really at all. Got to be a small gap around that plate. And there's no rubber seals or anything to stop liquid going in there. And there's no seals at all actually on the 510 threads either. So that can make it possible for liquid to ooze out in between those two surfaces. So they've had to think about what's going to happen when your tank leaks down into the 510. And it looks like that's what this kind of cutout area is. See if I can get that in the right angle. Yeah, see all that cutout area? Possibly that whole area will serve as a little catchment for liquid if it leaks through the 510, because the bottom of that isn't sealed to the plastic plate. It's up against it, but it will weep through it if the liquid's sitting in there. and they thought we'll make a little cutout there so it'll just catch any liquid, but it's still inside your device, so that's not great. So if you've got a really leaky tank with this mod, and you know, using this mod, you might want to every once in a while take this plate off, because it's really easy. It's just 3 screws and there's nothing else tricky going on, and just see if there's a whole lot of liquid pooling around in this area, and obviously clean it out if there is, because at some point it will, if it gets like fully loaded, you know, because I've seen people use super leaky tanks and it just leaks all over the top of the mod. So I know you guys are out there with leaky tanks putting liquid all around on top of your mod and in your mod. Don't do that. First of all, get a tank that doesn't leak. But okay, say you have got a leaky tank, it's been leaking a little bit. Just take this top plate off and have a look in here and just clean that out, because once that gets full of liquid, it'll sneak across under this plastic plate, and that will go down into the board and the rest of the mod, and that's no good. Okay, so this inner piece is going to be held down by the outer metal plate, which is a 510 negative, and that's actually movable on its own, like it's floating, but it is held down, and it holds your cell contacts as well. We'll get a better look at that. We'll take that out. That's a bit interesting. The 510 positive itself has its own spring. Now these screws are Phillips head. So that's what we've got inside. The second plate, springs for the cell contacts. Those guys sit on a couple of pegs which hold them in the right spot. You've got a little bit better wiring, a little bit better wiring separation than the L200. Yeah, a bit better. So there's your positive cell contact. There's a negative, and I do like this actually. As long as this joint remains clean, I like this system, because you've just got a solid bar of metal that goes from the 510 to the negative, the lower cell, and then it'll be grounded to the board as well. The board will be grounded straight to this metal frame. So less wiring, which I like. See how it just keeps it neater. There's just less stuff going on in here. So the white guy being your 510. 510 does have a little O-ring on it. See if I can get a bit closer. So there's a small orange, probably silicone O-ring, at least to try and stop liquid going through in between the positive pin and the plastic plate. So that's something okay, but I would wish they'd put an O-ring on here as well. So that's all looking pretty neat in there. Quite nice. Wiring's pretty simple. It's kind of separated out better. So the battery positive isn't jammed into anything else. It's kind of just got its own little spot to run through there. That will be your battery balance wire. That'll be coming up from this bottom contact, this guy here. Looks like this top battery piece should pull out. Yep. You've got battery. It's kind of more necessary on this because it's a metal frame, but it's always good to see. There are plastic tubes in the battery bay, in the battery compartment. So insulating tubes, and there's a separator in between the two cells. That's really good, because if there is a little tear in the wrap of the cell, or it'd have to be in both cells, but say if your cells had bad wraps or it had tears in the wraps you didn't notice, you have to stop any possible connection between the two cell cans, because that is catastrophic. So really nice to see that there's two insulating tubes, black plastic tubes, and I'd say they would just be probably glued in. Yeah, see, I can just because it's so black, this mod, everything's black, you can't see anything. You probably see that tube that I'm just poking out there, plastic tube, that'd just be glued in. So it is, pretty sure it's a metal frame. Yeah, so it's a metal frame. Actually, the metal frame doesn't go all the way through the middle. It's just the battery tubes. So the metal frame actually just goes to there and around, and then it just looks like it's solid because there's the two battery tubes and this plastic cover over it. depending on how far I want to get that apart. I don't want to ruin it too much, unless we really need to see it. There's already liquid right down. Yeah, this is not a good sign. So, see the liquid on this inner, this is like 3 layers deep already. Liquid already on this inner tray, which is the battery contact kind of plate. And it's going to be a bit hard to see on camera. Right down in here, that's already wet. So I did have the new tank on here. I can't remember what it's called, that guy. What is it? Obelisk tank. Okay. And when it was a little bit leaky, I filled it up and then I didn't use it for a couple of days and it did weep a bit. Not a huge amount, like not enough to flood all over the mod, but it must have weeped enough to go over the top plate. And this is literally in, I mean, I've only been through 1 tank of liquid in it, so I haven't even used it that much. And already 100% I can tell you, if you have a leaky tank, liquid is going to go into this device, and that is not good. Not good. That needs more sealing. Just, you gotta, come on Geekvape, you gotta stop liquid getting in these things, because I mean, yeah, I'm a bit of a dummy, but I'm not a complete idiot, and I try to take care of my stuff. But I've just had this new tank leak a bit and not noticed, and it's already gone inside the mod. Personally, I don't need a fully waterproof mod. I don't really care too much, but I do want a mod that's not going to have this, where you've got liquid just going straight in the top if one of your tanks leak. Or, you know, as I said earlier, they do just breathe a bit of condensation. Well, they just kind of have condensation around them. They, you know, breathe a bit of vapor out the airflow holes, and you always end up with that little bit of liquid around the top plate or underneath. And no good if there's liquid getting straight in through the top plate, because Geekvape doesn't normally do any conformal coating on the circuit board, so the circuit board itself is normally dry. Conformal coating is basically just a spray coating they put over the circuit board, a non-conductive coating. It doesn't make the board waterproof, it just kind of gives it a layer of protection, so if any moisture does get onto the board, it's not directly onto the solder joints and all the little tiny pins on the microcontroller and all that sort of stuff. Straight away it does protect it a bit, but Geekvape do not. All the last boards I've seen, they don't bother doing a conformal coating. A lot of other mod manufacturers actually do that. Why was I picking up the L200? Because that doesn't have conformal coating on the board either. A lot of other manufacturers I see, it's probably about 50-50 which manufacturers put a conformal coating on their boards or not. So this front panel here, I think will just be stuck down with adhesive, and I'm guessing once I prise this off, there's probably going to be screws underneath. So let's do that. Let's try not to. It's going to look terrible. I'm going to ruin it. I'll try not to ruin it. Just seeing some little tabs. Oh yeah, just spotted some tabs here and here, just above the board. Alrighties, combination of a little bit of adhesive and some clips. You just have to be careful. I'm kind of doing this a bit quickly, kind of rushing it a bit, but I mean, if you ever need to take this apart, just take it a bit slower. I've stuffed these two, broken the 2 top clips off. That's alright. It'll go back on. And yep, there's another one in the bottom as well. That one you'd probably need to access. You'd probably need to peel this sticker off and maybe pull the tube out. I probably wouldn't worry. I'd probably just break them off and not worry too much. You could always just put a little dab of glue along there. When you stick it back in, you should be alright. Okay, so there's the board. Yeah, it's got to be different because the port's in a different spot. So this guy has the charging port on the side, this one has it on top, and this guy is grounded through the case, whereas the L200 is not. Okay, we're back on the T5s for the board removal, for the board screws. And just note that these screws, same as the top screws, are gold, not for aesthetic reasons, but actually for a purpose, for corrosion protection. So these are actually electrical connections. You need to have a good electrical connection through these screws back to the frame, the metal case. Same as in the top plate. The top plate needs good, you know, as we spoke about, needs to have good connection back to the case as well. So that gold coating does actually prevent oxidation and corrosion. So yeah, not just to look pretty, actually does something. Okay, so the only thing left holding this onto the frame is that balance wire, which I won't bother desoldering for the moment. And that gives us a pretty good view of the internals. So there's those battery tubes I was talking about. A bit of white silicone there to hold them in, or white sealant. A little bit of tape, I'm not sure what that's for. Maybe a little bit of insulation. It's kind of over those capacitors there. Not sure. It is a completely different board. See if I can get a good shot of that, and then I will put up the L200. And true to form, no conformal coating on the board. It's just a dry board. So these are all the main power MOSFETs that are in the switch mode converter. Basically, they do all the work of converting the voltage from the batteries to your atomizer. These guys are output capacitors, which are smoothing, well, filtering in part of the switch mode circuit. That guy there is a shunt resistor, and the microcontroller can tell the voltage drop across this specific close tolerance resistor, and then it knows how much current's actually going through it. So we've got, yeah, there's the main. Basically, main output of the voltage converter is going through the board here, and it's interesting that the board is actually carrying a lot of current the whole length of the board. So all your atomizer current is actually going through this track, this trace. Often, what you'll have is an output from the converter, a pad very close, and then the wire just solders on very close there, and then goes to the 510. In this case, what you've got is the output. Yeah, as I said, going through the whole board. And that's why they've actually added extra solder. So when this got soldered, that would be left unmasked. So it would get extra solder and more current carrying capability to go through that trace, because it's a lot of current. You know, it could be up to like 40 or 50 amp. Can be on a low resistance, very low resistance build, high wattage, and 200 watts. So that's a hell of a lot of current going through that trace. That makes you wonder that even. I mean, there's some metal there, some extra solder, but yeah, that's a hell of a lot of current going through a small trace. But it looks like a fairly nicely laid out board overall. They've made room to do the 4 attachment points on the USB-C. Again, always say that. I like it when they've got 4 physical attachments. They are soldered, but they're soldered through. Gives you a nice little cross section there. We can see that the pins, flat pins of the socket actually go in little slots in the board and get soldered. So that should be reasonably strong. And we want to have a look at the microcontroller, just see if they're using the same microcontroller, because obviously this is a completely different board to the L200. But yeah, as I said, it could be a very similar actual circuit. You've got a little frame that holds the LCD, and these little frames will have pegs that go through the board, and then they just get melted on the other side. That holds them in place. You have to be really careful if you're ever having to move the screen, because these ribbon cables are just so delicate. So that ribbon cable is permanently attached, so that, you know, the evolved DNA boards, they actually have replaceable screens. Not many will bother putting a plug-in socket because it costs extra. So they just do it this way, where they've got this ribbon coming from the screen. They'd buy the screen as a unit, and it just solders directly onto the board. That's an entirely different microcontroller. What the F? Okay, it's an entirely different manufacturer. No, it's not going to be the same circuit at all then. It's weird. It's weird how Geekvape does this. I'd have to look at the markings on the board because I can't remember. I think this is an entirely different board manufacturer. Like, why wouldn't they just use the same guys that did the L200. I have seen it before where Geekvape uses 2 different manufacturers, but I don't know why they do it. So we have an ST brand microcontroller, an STM32FEC. Luckily my eyes are still decent and I can read that from here. I think not for long though. I think they're starting to get blurry. Oh no. It was a Nuvoton in the L200 and in a lot of the other Geekvape mods. They mainly use the Nuvoton microcontrollers, so this is entirely different. Just weird. I mean, yeah, as I said, overall a decent looking board, but it is interesting that the board is probably by a different manufacturer. Bugger, that means I'm going to have to retest the whole thing. What a pain. Yeah, I'll get around to it one of these days. Actually, it will be interesting to see if this has the full 12 volts output that the L200 has, because that's a big draw card, I reckon, for the L200. It is nice to see when they use a bigger switch for the fire switch. These guys are little tactile switches, ubiquitous tactile switches that are in kind of everything. Often they'll use just a smaller, lighter duty switches for the up and down, but then they'll use a bigger, heavier duty or a sealed unit for the fire button, which they haven't in this case. I've just used the same ones. Of course, it's cheaper to use the lighter duty ones, and then there's one less part number as well on your bill of materials. But it is nice to see a bigger fire button. It's just more durable because you're mashing the fire button all the time. It's taking way more cycles and work than the up and down. So you can kind of identify other switch mode sections on the board. Like, it looks like there's one here, so I can see a little inductor there. Probably that's a MOSFET or a couple of MOSFETs. And same as over here, there's a little group of capacitors, inductor, maybe a charge controller. That could be the charge controller there. One of these switch mode sections will be for the charge circuit, and there'll be a charge controller nearby, and the other switch mode section will be powering the screen and the microcontroller. Or it could be separate. Actually, these normally run on a lot lower voltage than the screens. But anyway, you've got different switch mode converters on the board to do different voltage rails. So they're taking the 8.4 volts maximum of the cells, turning into whatever the microcontroller needs, probably 3.3 volts, then whatever the screen needs, and then a variable switch mode controller for the charge circuit. So that's kind of the bulk of what's on the board. Is not really a whole lot. It looks complicated, but there's not really a whole lot when you break it down. So you've got microcontroller, that's the brain, a couple of switch mode power converter sections, voltage converter sections, and then you've got your main beefy voltage converter, which is this guy here. Again, switch mode could be buck or buck boost, we'll see. Big inductor there, which is all part of that section there. And that's about it, really. Okay, so that's a look inside the Geekvape Obelisk 200. Overall, not sure. I do like the design in some ways. It's fairly well thought out, apart from the liquid ingress protection. It's no good. It's just not good enough. I think they need to do better here. There's no seals around the top plate. There's no seals anywhere, really, in the top here. Well, there's one tiny little seal on the 510, but apart from that, there's a fairly clear shot of liquid leaking down in your 510 or around this plate and eventually getting into the board. And mine already had it after like maybe one tank of use. So that's not good. But the rest is not bad. Nothing electrically terrible. Insulated cells, which is good. Case grounding, which is fine. It's all metal case. Metal frame. Everything else looks pretty well laid out. But yeah. Sealing. It's not supposed to be a waterproof mod, but it's got to be better protected. It's used for vaping. It's got tanks with liquids in them all the time on top. It's got to be fit for purpose, and I'm sketchy on that. I mean, whether it's actually an issue in real use, I don't know. Can't say. Don't want to bag them too much, but yeah, that's what I reckon. Yep. So there's a look at the Geekvape Obelisk. All right. Thanks for watching.